Give me a drink, bartender. I'll take that. The hell you are. Got something to say, Rusty? Yeah. Throw. Out of shots, big boy.
Anyone gonna drink this?
In life, there is a soul. And with that soul, there is a voice. If the San Diego Coronado Bay Bridge had a voice, it might have much to say.
In the late 60s of the 20th century, Coronado was nothing but a sleepy beach town off the coast of Southern California. It was an isolated, small yet inclusive community where the town stayed for the most part local. But when the Coronado Bay Bridge opened, something changed. Not only did the bridge connect the world to the town of Coronado, but it exposed a few of Coronado's ambitious residents to the world. This is the story about how several Coronado's high school alumni started one of the biggest marijuana operations throughout the 1970s and 80s. It all started with Lance Weber, Coronado High class of 1962. After spending a few years in the Navy, he returned home to surf and party. In the late 60s, he started smuggling small bundles of marijuana from Tijuana to Imperial Beach. He'd put 25 pounds of drugs in a waterproof plastic bag, tie the floaty bag to his waist, and swim a short distance across the border. One night in the summer of 1971, at a beach party, Lance approached Eddie Otero to see if he might be interested in making the swim from Mexico to the US. Lance offered Eddie, who was about to start his senior year in high school, $1,000, and Eddie accepted. Lance recruited Eddie because he knew the kid could swim. Nicknamed the Otter, Eddie was a lifeguard and member of Coronado's water polo and swim teams. While he was still in high school, Eddie made the swim a few more times, with Lance waiting in the car to collect the merchandise. On one midnight swim, Eddie thought he saw a shark. After his close encounter, he convinced Lance to start making drug runs with a small inflatable Zodiac boat. Lance would drive a boat from Tijuana to Coronado State Beach, where a car would be waiting on the strand. They'd exchange a light flashing signal, where then the boat would head towards the shore. The pop, motor, and the boat were loaded into the car, and a few seconds later, they were off. Using the boat was safer and allowed to smuggle bigger loads. But to get more drugs, they had to negotiate a deal with their supplier, a guy who they called Joe the Mexican. The only problem was Joe didn't speak any English, and they needed someone who could speak Spanish. Enter Lou Villar. Lou Villar had been a popular Spanish teacher and coach at Coronado High. After a few years at Coronado, he quit teaching. He married one of his students, bought a VW bus, and started painting houses. Lance, Eddie, and Lou went to the Long Bar in Rosarito, where they met Joe the Mexican, who agreed to sell them 100 kilos. With more product, they needed additional people to help load and unload the boat, so Lou started to recruit his old students from Coronado High, including a former senior class president and the captain of the basketball team. It didn't take long for Lou, the oldest person in the group, to take charge of the operation. They soon bought bigger boats and smuggled in loads as large as 30,000 pounds. They started calling themselves the Coronado Company. Over the next 10 years, they built an empire, earning over $100 million by smuggling drugs into the country from Mexico, Thailand, Morocco, and Pakistan. For a decade, they lived the good life, buying expensive houses, luxury cars, and joining exclusive polo clubs. But Coronado is a small place, and people talk. Sergeant Dennis Grimo of Coronado's police department started hearing rumors about high school kids smuggling drugs from Mexico. He notified DEA Special Agent James Conklin, who started to build a case against the Coronado Company. In 1977, the U.S. government issued an indictment for 25 members of the Coronado Company. However, they moved to Santa Barbara to avoid capture and lived under false identifications to continue smuggling for another 4 years. When Lou refused to pay a contractor working on his house $50,000, the builder tipped off federal authorities about the true identity of his employer. In 1981, Lou and several members of the Coronado Company were arrested in Santa Barbara.
What did you find on them the day that you people picked them up?
About $800,000 in cash, close to half a ton of tie sticks in one of the houses that we searched.
Philip DeMassa, a San Diego defense attorney, represented Lou. DeMassa advised Lou to plead guilty, and he received a 10-year sentence. But Lou didn't like prison, and he cut an unusual deal with the U.S. attorney. DeMassa was a lawyer with a reputation for successfully representing drug dealers. The U.S. attorney suspected DeMassa was more of a criminal than a criminal defense attorney and wanted to bring a case against him. So Lou offered the government information they could use against his former lawyer. As part of Lou's deal, he also agreed to testify against his old students. DeMassa was arrested, and the government seized the files for his criminal clients. A judge declared the search of DeMassa's office unconstitutional, and the case against him fell apart. He pleaded guilty to a few minor charges, served no jail time, and continued to practice law. He died during a scuba diving accident in 2012. Many of Lou's former students who were part of the Coronado Company were not as lucky as DeMassa, and they spent years in federal prison based on their former Spanish teacher's testimony. Lance Weber became a government informant in exchange for a reduced sentence. He died of Lou Gehrig's disease in 2000. Eddie Otero received a 10-year sentence. However, during a prison riot, he saved a guard's life and was released 3 years early. After prison, he started a successful air and water purification business in Palm Springs. He died while tuna fishing off the coast of Mexico in 2013. Lou Villar, the former Spanish teacher turned drug king, was resentenced after providing information against his attorney and former students. He served less than 2 years in prison and was allowed to keep most of the profits from his drug operation. Nobody knows where Lou Villar is today, or if he's even still alive. But in 2013, at the age of 76, he sat down with a reporter from GQ magazine. He was asked if he'd do it all again, where he said he would. Who says crime doesn't pay?
Fog-filled East End London in the Whitechapel district, Jack the Ripper kills what is known as the Canonical Five. Mary Ann Nichols was the first victim who was found on August 31st, 1888 in Bucksborough, Whitechapel. Mary Ann Nichols was born on the 26th of August, 1845 in Dean Street, Soho, London. She married a man and had 5 children in total. After the birth of her latest child, her and her husband's marriage abruptly ended after Mary Ann's heavy drinking problem and an accused affair her husband had with a family nurse. Her husband would go on to pay her a weekly allowance of around 5 shillings. Later, she would go on and become a sex worker. She would go around living in different boarding houses. On August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was found lying on the ground in front of a gated stable entrance in Bucksborough. She was found on her back with her eyes open, legs straight, her skirt raised above her knees, and her left hand touching the gate of the stable entrance, with her back and throat severely slashed and her body disemboweled. Annie Chapman was born September 25, 1814. She was known to be able to handle large quantities of alcohol, and her problem would eventually worsen once her father committed suicide. Annie would eventually get married to her cousin and have 3 children, with 1 disabled child who would be sent away, worsening her drinking problem once again. Her daughter would also pass away, and the couple would divorce after multiple occasions of drinking issues on Annie's behalf. She would receive 10 shillings a week from her divorced husband, but he would end up passing away from alcoholism, cutting her allowance off. She became a heavy alcoholic. On September 8, 1881, the body of Annie Chapman was found at 29 Hanbury Street. Annie's throat and body were slashed, as the victim before, but this time her womb was removed as well.
Elizabeth Stride was the 3rd victim who was found on September 30th, 1888, in Whitechapel. Elizabeth Stride was born on the 27th of November in 1843 in Torslanda, Sweden. Stride had a relatively good marriage with a man named John Stride. They didn't have any children, and they ran a coffee shop in East London. Their marriage had eventually begun deteriorating, but had decided to continue living together. Stride also had a very heavy drinking problem. Stride's body was discovered on Sunday, September 30th, in 1888, in Dutfield's yard. The person who had discovered the body said it appeared to be a bundle lying upon the ground. She was mutilated, blood still flowing from a single knife wound inflicted on Stride's neck. This suggests Stride was killed shortly before the discovery in the yard.
45 minutes later, another woman named Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square, just west of the Stride murder. Catherine Eddowes, also found on September 30th, 1881, in Mitre Square, London. Eddowes was born on April 14th, 1842. Her parents died early, and she and her siblings would go to an orphanage. Eddowes eventually married and had 2 children with a tattoo of her husband's initials on her forearm. She would end up leaving her husband due to her drinking problem and ended up lodging with a man named John Kelly. She would perform sex work and eventually take up hot picking in split rooms at lodging houses. The night of her murder, Eddowes was found laying drunk in the street when police had taken her in and released her until she was sober enough. Later, she was found dead. Her body was found lying on her back with her head resting on a coal hole and turned towards the left shoulder, in the southwest corner of Mitre Square by the square's beat policemen. Her throat was slashed and her uterus and left kidney were removed, and her body was severely mutilated, including her face. Morticians believe she had only been dead within half an hour before being found.
On September 15, 1888, a letter was sent to the police by someone who claims to be the killer of both women. Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I've laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about the leather apron gave me real fits. I'm down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and I want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so sharp, and I want to get to work right away if I had a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving a trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands to curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. The police had begun to propose that her killer had anatomical knowledge because of how Annie Chapman's womb was removed. Whoever wrote the letter sets the name Jack the Ripper into stone as they sign the complimentary close. Media and the public start to get antsy and morbidly intrigued. The letter has not yet been confirmed to be the real Jack the Ripper and has been questioned to be a letter from a journalist. This letter wasn't published to the public until October 1881. November 9th, 1888, the 5th victim, Mary Ann Kelly, is found at 13 Miller's Court in her bed. Mary was known for being the youngest victim at 25. She was born on April 14, 1842. She was born in Ireland from a wealthy family, but got cut off. She would have contact with her sister, though. She married a coal miner who ended up dying in a coal mining explosion incident. She would later move to Cardiff with her cousin and become a sex worker. Later, she moved to London and worked in a high-class brothel. She was nicknamed Dark Mary because, like the others, was known for being a heavy drinker and alcoholic. She would end up living in the hotspot of Jack the Ripper's crimes on Dorset Street. This was the most gruesome murder out of all the other women, as she was disemboweled and virtually skinned out. Her face was hacked beyond recognition and with her throat severed to the spine, and her insides were removed as well, with her kidney and uterus. Her heart was also nowhere to be found. The person who had discovered the body had said, "The sight that I saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked like more of the work of a devil than a man." There are over 100 suspects who could be Jack the Ripper. Two of the most well-known are Aaron Kaminsky and Joseph Barnett. Aaron Kaminsky worked as a Polish hairdresser and was arrested and detained in a workhouse in the 1890s under claims of violent behavior with a knife, and had also been institutionalized for threatening his sister with a knife. Kaminsky was described as a low class with homicidal tendencies and a hatred for women. At the time of the murders, Aaron apparently lived on Providence Street or Greenfield Street, both of which addresses are close to the sites of the murders. He was known for paranoid schizophrenia in the asylum and only had 2 violent occasions. Kaminsky preferred to speak his native language, which may suggest that his English could have been poor, and that he was unable to persuade English-speaking victims into dark alleyways, as the Ripper was supposed to do, but Kaminsky was not restricted until 1891. It's still a possibility for him to be a suspect, especially considering when the canonical murders ended. Aaron Kaminsky is known as the DNA-tested victim whose name made headlines. Russell Edwards, the one who uncovered this DNA evidence, found the DNA from a possible shawl at the murder scene of Catherine Eddowes. The DNA connected Aaron Kaminsky, but what is often left out is that the DNA found could be an error, which would mean it only identified a mutation called 314.1C, which at first is a rare mutation in 1 out of 290,000 people, making it very likely to be Aaron. But the very likely error could also be 315.1C, shared by more than 99% of people with European descent. So this DNA, if it is still 315.1C, could be anyone. The results were not tested again until 2019 by Liverpool John Moores University and University of Leeds. The DNA presented matched descendants of Kaminsky and Eddowes, but the shawl had never been taken into evidence by police during the murders either, making this evidence not incredibly reliable. Joseph Barnett was born on May 25, 1858 in Whitechapel. Barnett was a fish porter who had worked at Billingsgate Market, located in the East End of London. Suspicions began in 1972 when an article was published by a former British detective named Bruce Paley, which had suggested that he was Jack the Ripper. Barnett was known as the former roommate of Mary Kelly, who had obsessive tendencies with her and tried to scare her out of her sex work. It is also known that he had been set on getting Mary away from sex work and alcoholism. He had been a fish porter for more than a decade, which gave him prior knowledge with working with knives. He had possessed a weapon that matched the knife with which the killer had inflicted the wounds to his numerous victims as well. The two had been known to have previous fights. On the 30th of October of 1888, a violent fight had broken out between the two, in which the roommate attacked each other by throwing blunt objects at each other. As a result of this, the glass of the window, which had been adjacent to the door, was shattered. Barnett had later testified that once after the fight had occurred, they saw each other several times. Both he and Mary from then on would put an arm through a slit in order to open the porch from the inside, pushing the inner bolt, since they lost the only key and had no money to manufacture a copy during their fight, which meant that he had access into the home.
March 18th, 1984. 42-year-old Katsuhisa Izaki comes home from a long day at work. After doffing his stuffy suit, he settles into the tub for a relaxing bath. He was coming up on his 2-year anniversary as president of the Izaki Glico Corporation, a popular multi-million-dollar food and confectionery company based in Osaka, Japan. It was loud back in the office, noisy and crowded, but in his house, it was quiet. It was especially quiet tonight, though. Only a nice, nighttime ambience for him to relax to. But what he didn't know was that this night would set in motion one of the greatest unsolved cases of all time. At 9:00 p.m., 2 gunmen force themselves into Izaki's bathroom. There, they grab him out of the bathtub and wrestle him out of the house. They place him in the back of their car and drive off into the night. These men weren't just simple thugs, however. Their capture of Katsuhisa Izaki had been methodically planned out. Earlier that night, the 2 gunmen had scaled the brick wall of Izaki's residence. They broke into the property's smaller house, which belonged to Izaki's 70-year-old mother. She was forced to give up the key to her son's house and was then tied up. The gunmen proceeded to enter Izaki's home. They cut the phone lines and made their way upstairs. The kidnappers came across Izaki's wife and eldest daughter, who they swiftly subdued and tied up. They then made their way down the hallway to Izaki. Before long, they had stormed the bathroom and kidnapped the Glico CEO. They drove Izaki to a small pump warehouse in Ibaraki, Osaka. Here, they started the next step of their plan. On March 19th, at 1:15 a.m., Glico's Director of Human Resources, Fujie Hirotake, receives a phone call. The caller directs him to a phone box where he finds a ransom letter. The letter says, in part, "I am holding a hostage. Prepare 1 billion yen in cash and 100 kilograms of gold. I won't negotiate. Just listen to what I say." Glico attempts to pay the ransom in collaboration with the local police. They bring the money to the instructed location but receive no further details. Glico is forced to call the operation off. March 20th, 10 p.m. Izaki is abandoned by his kidnappers. Approximately 14 hours later, he manages to escape the warehouse. He then contacts police and, after almost 3 days of being held hostage, Katsuhisa Izaki is finally brought to safety. But his torment was far from over. April 2nd. A letter is dropped off at Izaki's residence. The letter is accompanied by eye drops filled with hydrochloric acid. The letter reads, in part, "Dear Katsuhisa, do not show this to the police. How dare you break our promise and run away from us? I told you that if you run away or disobey us, we'll kill both you and your wife. My people are really mad at you." The writer of the letter later demands 10 million yen for each person in Izaki's family, a total of 60 million yen. The request was never fulfilled. April 10th. Glico's headquarters is lit on fire, burning 166 square meters of its facilities to the ground. 20 minutes later, the headquarters of a Glico subsidiary company, Glico Nutrition, also catches fire. By this time, the authorities had caught on to the connection between these arson attacks and Izaki's kidnapping. The case was officially classified as Metropolitan Designated Case 114 on April 12th. April 22nd. Glico's corporate auditor, Kiriko Fujisawa, receives a letter. The letter makes a demand for 10 million yen. It goes on to say, quote, "Once we get the money, we'll forgive the president, Glico, and everyone else. If you betray us again, we won't be writing you. Glico will go out of business, and you will all disappear, down to nothing. Signed, the monster with 21 faces." This was the first time that the culprit, or culprits, had signed one of their letters. The name was supposedly inspired by a popular Japanese children's book titled The Fiend with 20 Faces. On May 10th, 1984, a letter claiming to have poisoned select boxes of Glico products is sent to local newspapers. Mass panic erupts across Japan. Many stores in the region immediately pull all Glico products from their shelves. Despite the panic, all products tested by the police yielded no signs of tampering. The now infamous monster with 21 faces would continue to harass Glico and its partnering companies, as well as the people of Japan. However, on June 26th, it would finally end. On that day, a letter is published in Japan's newspapers, saying, "To our fans throughout Japan, we are satisfied. The president of Glico is already gone with his head hanging down long enough. We would like to forgive him." They continued, "Police, you did well. Continue with your hard work. Not even Sherlock Holmes could solve this case." Signed, the monster with 21 faces. P.S. I will return in January. Despite their promise, they wouldn't be gone for long. September 12th, 1984. The monster with 21 faces sends a threatening letter to the Morinaga Food Company, demanding a payment of 100 million yen. Knowing what happened with Glico, the company agreed to pay the money. but, much like the case with Glico, there was nobody at the instructed location to receive the payment. The operation was forced to be called off. It seems that the monster with 21 faces was continuing to extort food companies, even during its supposed break. And it seems even more so that Morinaga would be its next target of interest. October 8th, 1984. Breaking their vow of silence to the public, the monster with 21 faces posts a letter in the Japanese newspapers. To all mothers in Japan, they write, in autumn, appetite is huge. Candy is great. When you think sweets, no matter what you say, it's Morinaga, right? We've added some special flavor to it. The flavor of potassium cyanide is a little bitter. Tell children not to get cavities and buy it for them. Mass panic erupts across the country again, and, like last time, products in stores across the country are immediately pulled from shelves and tested. Unlike the poison threats with Glico, which had turned out false, many Morinaga products actually tested positive for cyanide poisoning. Hearing this news, many other stores, targeted or not, dumped Morinaga's goods. The company was hit hard by this event, and they were forced to lay off more than 400 workers. For the next 10 months, the monster with 21 faces would continue to harass food companies and the Japanese prefecture police. For Japan's police, this case had been a national embarrassment. Despite multiple operations, the police had not caught any of their suspects. They had been chasing the culprits in circles for the better part of 17 months, stakeout after stakeout, heist after heist, and they still had nothing to show for it. August 1985. Unable to handle the growing shame that the monster with 21 faces had placed upon him, the head of the Shika Prefecture Police, Shoji Yamamoto, commits suicide by dousing himself in kerosene and lighting himself on fire. The monster with 21 faces responds with yet another letter. It says, in part, Yamamoto, who worked his way up, died like a man. That's why we will give him an obituary gift. We will stop bullying the food industry. They then later say, we are bad guys. That means we've got more to do other than bullying companies. It's fun to lead a bad man's life. After that, they went quiet. The monster with 21 faces, the mysterious group who had haunted Japanese companies, citizens, and its police for 17 months, was never heard from again. But, like some sort of sick joke, despite all of their threats and demands, the monster with 21 faces never took any money.
On November 22, 1963, the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was sitting in a car as part of a motorcade that was going through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. It was part of a 2-day tour of major cities in Texas, during which Kennedy had planned to announce his candidacy for the upcoming 1964 election. Over 50,000 people were gathered around. Many were even looking down from nearby buildings. Out of nowhere, gunshots rang out. Among the commotion of the crowd, rumors began to circulate that the president was hit. The motorcade eventually sped away, and upon reaching a nearby hospital some 30 minutes after the shooting, President Kennedy was pronounced dead. Who killed him, however, is a question that remains unanswered to this day. A week after the shooting, the Warren Commission was formed. The group was made with the intention of investigating what had happened that day and figure out who killed the president. Almost a year later, on September 24, 1964, they submitted their official report. They concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was the shooter responsible. The set of events goes as follows. JFK and his wife rode in the 2 back seats of the car. In front of them were the governor of Texas and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Connolly, and the 2 front seats, including the driver's seat, were occupied by CIA agents. After the initial shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald was captured trying to escape a nearby schoolbook depository. The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and had vague motives. Because 3 bullet shells were found in the depository Lee Harvey Oswald fired the shots from, they concluded that 3 shots must have been fired. The following is the perspective proposed by the Warren Commission, and is the main reason the Commission's report has been so controversial. Lee Harvey Oswald was reported to have fired 3 shots. The first missed the motorcade and bounced off the pavement and hit a nearby bystander. The second hit JFK. It went through the back of his neck, and hit the governor in front of him in the back. It came out of his chest and hit his arm and then shot through his knee. The bullet was recovered perfectly intact, and the third shot fired by Lee Harvey Oswald was the one that killed JFK, hitting him in the back of the head. The trials following this set of events would call it the magic bullet theory in reference to the proposed trajectory of the second bullet. With this set of events published, the majority of the public was settled. They believed Lee Harvey Oswald was solely responsible for the death of the president, and the books could be closed. But soon, the official report would start to fall apart. The first bullet that bounced off the pavement hit a pedestrian. That pedestrian was named James Teague. When he came forward about the event, he said that he was walking by and had only stopped to turn and look at the motorcade after hearing a gunshot. A few moments later, and after another gunshot, he was hit in the jaw. It wouldn't make sense if he was hit by the first bullet, because the first bullet was the reason he turned to look at the motorcade to begin with. The governor and his wife, who sat in front of Kennedy, also agree that the official report doesn't match up with what happened in the car, saying, "There is my absolute knowledge that one bullet caused the president's first wound and that an entirely separate shot struck me." Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle was bolt action and couldn't have chambered a round in the time between that first shot and the second shot that the governor proposed. This had led many to believe that there would have to be another shooter. While most know about the Zapruder film, there was actually another angle caught by another camera. All who've seen this other angle say that there were puffs of gun smoke coming from a grassy knoll. That would explain the potential other shots, but human testimony is often unreliable. So whether or not that is true, we can't say for ourselves unless we take a look at the footage. But we can't see the footage for ourselves, because it's missing. In 1976, the House Select Committee on Assassinations was formed for the purpose of taking another look at the evidence surrounding the JFK's assassination. 13 years after the event, new technologies had developed that would allow them to look at all the evidence with more scrutiny. All evidence pertaining to the case was kept in CIA lockup during the investigation. When they used an audiograph to extrapolate data from the Zapruder film, they heard 6 shots instead of 3. This leads us to the other piece of footage. The day after the 6 shots argument was presented, the other footage that supposedly showed the puffs of gun smoke in time with the shots disappeared from the CIA lockup. The weird circumstances surrounding this event and the investigations that followed motivate people to continue to analyze information and motives to this day. Many people blame the CIA or mob or other third parties, but the entire situation is best summed up by the official statement given by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. At the end of their trials, they released the statement, "The committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy. The committee is unable to identify the other gunman or the extent of the conspiracy."